I can still picture the morning I made the decision to leave my hometown. It was one of those crisp autumn days when the air carries the earthy scent of fallen leaves. I crammed everything I held dear into my battered old pickup truck, determined to leave the pain behind and start anew. Walking away wasn't something I took lightly, but it was the only path forward. Betrayal and lies had shattered my world, and I knew that healing meant putting distance between me and those who had wronged me. After hours of driving, I stumbled upon a quaint, sleepy little town that seemed to whisper promises of a fresh start. The people there were welcoming, the pace of life was unhurried, and the charm of the place was undeniable. It wasn't long before I noticed a rundown gas station and garage that had been sitting on the market for ages. I saw potential in that neglected property and made a lowball offer, half expecting rejection. To my surprise, they accepted it, and that old station became the cornerstone of my new life and livelihood. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself at my favorite tavern, soaking in the quiet atmosphere that had become my refuge since moving here. Shortly after settling in, I had purchased that gas station and repair shop for a bargain price. It had been sitting untouched for 2 years, and the owner was eager to offload it. I saw it as the perfect opportunity to rebuild, a chance to leave my past in the dust. The first thing I did was transform the place. I constructed a sizable retail store facing the gas station to fill the gap left by the town's only grocery store, which closed by 7 p.m. every day. I even relocated the fuel tanks to make the pumps more visible and added ample parking to make it more convenient for customers. The store quickly became a community hub, especially during the busiest hours, 7 p.m. to midnight. I kept it open 24/7, while the garage operated weekdays and worked on special projects on Saturdays. Initially, the local bar wasn't too thrilled when I started selling basic liquor, but over time, it became a lucrative venture that also created much-needed jobs in the area. After restructuring the store's layout with help from a clever hire, business boomed. Within no time, I'd paid off the equity loan and doubled the staff to keep up with the growing demand. Friday and Saturday nights were a whirlwind of bar patrons grabbing snacks, while Sundays saw folks buying beer by the case, always at fair prices. That particular Saturday, I was nursing a double shot of Jack Daniels with a side of ice water and lemon, reflecting on the day. I'd just finished replacing a steering column in an old truck that had been in one family since the 40s. Tracking down the part and fabricating the necessary fixtures had taken me 8 months. But it was worth it to see the owner's gratitude. The truck was more than just a vehicle to him, it was family. Around 4 to 7 p.m., the bar would have its quiet spell before the place filled with music and laughter. Farmers often brought their daughters for a bit of fun after a hard day's work. In my 6.5 years here, I'd built a solid reputation and formed bonds with people who genuinely looked out for one another. I'd established a routine of coming to the tavern every Saturday evening for a drink and some time to gather my thoughts. But that evening, my peace was shattered when I saw them walk in. My stomach churned at the sight. The woman was my ex-wife's twin sister, and the young man with her had once been the son I thought was mine. Memories I'd fought so hard to bury came rushing back. Living with them had blinded me to the truth, but now I could see everything clearly. The boy had grown into a young man who bore an uncanny resemblance to his biological father, proving that the truth has a way of surfacing eventually. They didn't notice me, which was a small mercy. My long, scruffy hair and beard, combined with the weight I'd lost, made me unrecognizable. I watched as they showed the bartender a photo and exchanged a few words before leaving. Later, the bartender, Tom, came over to my table. What did they want? I asked, trying to sound casual. They were looking for someone. They heard a rumor you might live here and came to see if it was true, Tom said. They asked for a picture and mentioned a woman named Willa, who's dying of cancer and wants to make peace. I lit a cigarette, taking a deep drag before replying. The woman is my ex's twin, Tammy, and the boy is my ex-wife's son, her illegitimate son. She made me believe he was mine for years. Do you think they were telling the truth? Tom hesitated before answering. I'd say they were partly honest, but they're definitely keeping something big under wraps. As Tom walked away, I couldn't help but reflect on how it had all started. Nearly 7 years ago, I had walked out of their lives, vowing never to return. Back then, they'd mocked me, thinking I was overreacting. They had no idea I'd uncovered the ultimate betrayal. A DNA test proving our youngest child wasn't mine but my brother-in-law's. That revelation set everything in motion, leading me to where I was now. A wise old woman had warned me to flee when I uncovered an insurance policy naming Willa as the beneficiary, with a payout of $4 million in the event of my accidental death. That was the final straw. I left without a backward glance, packed my life into my truck, and drove 2 states away to start over. When it came to matters like child support, infidelity, and defamation, their smug laughter eventually came to an abrupt halt. The tables had turned, and the punchline was no longer at my expense. I was the one having the last laugh. Their running joke had always been that my sole value was in my ability to generate money. Everything I touched seemed to flourish, and as a result, Willa and the kids lived a life of luxury, never wanting for anything. But their world began to unravel when Willa learned what I had done. I sold 3 of our businesses, cleared every debt, and made a tidy profit by selling off our 2 apartment buildings. I canceled all the credit cards, removed my name from the joint bank accounts, and transferred my half of the house to her. Then, I walked away with half of our assets in cash, slashing what had been a steady monthly income of $10,000 to absolutely nothing. Willa's sister, Tammy, quickly discovered the true cost of trying to use me. My attorney had already frozen their accounts before they even received the subpoenas, leaving them effectively penniless. After the divorce, my lawyer called Willa in and reimbursed her for a quarter of their financial losses. When she asked him why, his reply was simple. For him, it was never about the money. It was about principle. He hopes this gives you the chance to start over and learn from your mistakes. But Willa wasn't ready to let go. She refused to finalize the divorce without speaking to me directly, leaving us in a state of legal separation instead. I saw no point in entertaining a conversation with someone who had spent years lying to me. Left without her usual financial cushion, Willa was forced to work for the first time in her life, quickly realizing how fast money disappears without an income. I'd taken precautions, knowing Willa and Tammy were manipulative and vengeful by nature. I had my attorney forward all important mail to a rented FedEx box, which was then forwarded to my work address each week. It wasn't a matter of if they'd try to retaliate. It was simply a matter of when. Their family had a history of holding grudges, and my absence was bound to agitate them. The longer I stayed away, the worse their eventual response would be. When Tammy showed up, I knew the game wasn't over. I finished my drink and slipped out through the back door to avoid being spotted. Cutting through the empty lot behind the tavern, I circled around the block to reach my pickup truck. As I unlocked the door, a man approached me. "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Arthur Sethra," he said. "No doubt," I replied, eyeing him warily. "And you are?" "My name is Peter Edwards. I'm married to your eldest daughter, Connie," he said. "That could be either a blessing or a curse," I said cautiously. "If she's anything like her mother," I'd lean toward the latter. "Why are you here?" "I came to find you. There are things that need to be resolved," Peter explained. "Funny, those things might have been resolved already if your mother-in-law would just sign the divorce agreement," I said. Peter blinked in surprise. "What divorce agreement?" "Follow me," I said, motioning for him to get in the truck. We drove through town and up a long driveway leading to a farmhouse. Inside my home office, I showed him the divorce papers and let him make copies. Peter didn't need to know that I didn't actually live there. I'd built the house for the grand dame, hoping she'd leave her old place eventually. Peter seemed polite and confident, though I couldn't shake the suspicion that he might be part of some scheme cooked up by Willa and Tammy. As he used my Wi-Fi to download files to his laptop, I observed his expressions. The documents contradicted what he seemed to believe, and I could see the realization dawn on his face. "Do you think Connie knows any of this?" he asked, looking unsettled. "That's a question only you can answer," I said. "But here's one for you. How certain are you that Willa is really dying of cancer?" Peter hesitated. "Tammy and Seth told the bartender that today, but I'm not so sure. Willa's in a common-law marriage with her former lawyer now, and they're expecting their second child. She's the one who asked me to find you, claiming she needs the divorce finalized so she can remarry. He called Connie and put the phone on speaker. Connie, did you know your mother has been lying about the divorce not being finalized? What are you talking about? Connie sounded confused. Mom said Dad abandoned us and cleared out everything before disappearing. If it wasn't for our stepfather, we wouldn't have survived. I'm sending you the legal file now, Peter said. Read it and get back to me. As they talked, I grabbed 2 beers, opened one, and slid the other across the table to Peter. Why didn't you tell her you found me? I asked. Peter sighed. Connie and I have only been married 2 years, and we just had a son 3 months ago. For now, I'm keeping this to myself. Everyone thinks I'm investigating a case. He showed me his police badge, confirming he was with the Paradise Police Department. Pulling up the department's website, I verified his identity. The accident report from a few months back led me to you, Peter explained. Connie filed a report about your disappearance, which made its way to the wanted list. The insurance company informed me of the ruling in your favor. But after reviewing your file, it's clear there's more to the story. What happened to the $250,000 Willa was supposed to receive along with the house? Why are they lying about everything? Looks like I'm not the only one being fed lies, I said, just as Peter's phone rang again. For years, they had painted me as a terrible father, but now the truth was unraveling. I'll need to speak with the district attorney, Peter said. That $250,000 in cash vanished as soon as it reached your father's lawyer. Until the DA investigates, it's best if no one else finds out. I stood up to grab some snacks, giving Peter privacy to finish his call. When I returned, he asked, "Why do you want Connie to talk to Aunt Josie?" Aunt Josie knows everything about Willa and George's affair, I explained. She never married but raised her daughter as a single mom, which gave her a different perspective on life. She believes Tammy and Willa conspired to use George and me, though their ultimate motive is still a mystery. If that's true, why hasn't Josie spoken out? Peter asked. Her granddaughter, Jody, wants her to move in with her, but Josie insists on waiting until the truth is fully revealed, I said. Jody visits her often with her 2 boys, but Josie keeps to herself. Socializing with Willa and Tammy has always drained her. They've spent their lives manipulating people. It wasn't until Josie shared her findings with me that I truly understood the depth of their schemes. Do you want to ask me about your kids before I leave? Peter offered. Not until I'm sure you are who you say you are, I replied firmly. This could just be another move in their game. If Willa is planning to sue me, why does she think she'd win? Look into the sudden death of my lawyer while you're at it. Peter's face went pale as he started to grasp the kind of people he had married into. We decided to exchange phone numbers, agreeing to keep each other informed. After walking him to the door, I shook his hand and said goodbye. Once he was gone, I cleaned up, locked the apartment, and took a long roundabout route home to make sure I wasn't being followed. As I drove, my thoughts wandered. My life had improved so much since I left the past behind. Did I really want to reopen those wounds? Knowing Willa and Tammy, I had no doubt they'd go to any length for money. When I walked through the door, 2 little tornadoes in the form of my 3- and 4-year-old kids latched onto my legs. I scooped them up, their laughter instantly lifting my mood. Just like their mother, they were the light of my life. Dinner's almost ready, Jody called out from the kitchen, and I headed to wash up. Over dinner, I told her about my day. It was hard to believe how my life had turned out, especially considering where I was almost 7 years ago. Before leaving Paradise, I had made a promise to my grandmother Josie to stay in touch, and I kept that promise, calling her every Sunday. About 1.5 years ago, she reached out, asking for my help. Her granddaughter Jody needed to escape a bad marriage and find a safe place to start over. At the time, Jody was 10 years younger than me, childless, and living on an army base out of state. I didn't know her well, but I owed Josie and was glad to help. It took a week to secure and partially furnish a 2-bedroom apartment for her, which would have been impossible without a friend's assistance. When I arrived to pick Jody up, she'd already quit her job, emptied her bank accounts, and packed her bags. Her husband was away for his final training exercise before enlisting in the army. I rented a U-Haul and arrived quietly around 8 p.m. With help from neighbors and friends, we loaded everything she wanted into the truck and left town in under 4 hours. For safety, I refused to tell anyone where I was from. During the drive, Jody and I got to know each other. Late that night, she received a call from her grandmother. I couldn't help but grin when I overheard Jody say, "Grandma, Art picked me up. You could have warned me he's a wild bushman who might actually clean up okay if he tried." The next day, Josie contacted Jody's lawyer to ensure all her legal documents were sent to my FedEx box. Jody warned me that her soon-to-be ex-husband could cause trouble, so I took precautions to protect her. In the weeks that followed, Jody began managing my store. She proved to be an exceptional manager, implementing successful changes and focusing on customer satisfaction. Her approachable personality attracted new clients, and she created a well-organized, drama-free staff. Josie eventually had to file a restraining order against Jody's ex-husband due to his persistent threats. He was dishonorably discharged from the army and, to our surprise, moved back to my old hometown, likely hoping to find Jody there. To deter attention, Jody wore a diamond ring and told people she'd figure out the story when asked about it. Rumors spread that she was my future mail-order bride, which we both found amusing. She started bringing me lunch on Saturdays, knowing I'd forget to eat while working, and our relationship blossomed naturally. Everyone assumed we were a couple, and Josie kept us updated on family events back in paradise. We grew curious when we learned Jody's ex had become friendly with Tammy. On the day Jody's divorce was finalized, we celebrated with friends at the bar, sharing our first kiss during a slow dance under the dim lights. 6 months later, we moved in together. One evening, while the kids were taking their bath, I decided to shave off my beard and mustache, leaving only a bit of stubble. The kids giggled in amazement as I lathered my face. And there's, with the bowl and brush Jody had given me for Christmas. "You'd look just like Daddy if you shaved too," Jody teased, surprising me when she walked in. "Should I cut his hair while we're at it?" she asked the kids, who squealed with excitement. Laughing, I replied, "I'll let the barber handle that on Monday." "Nope. I'm doing it now before you change your mind," Jody insisted. Once the kids were tucked into bed, she set to work, and by the time she finished, I barely recognized the man staring back at me in the mirror. "You did a great job," I told her, heading off to shower away the loose hair while she cleaned up. That's when Josie called to let us know Connie had just left her house. Jody believed Josie was ready to confront the family and straighten things out. Connie had uncovered that the $600 per month I had set aside for each of my 3 children hadn't reached them. Willa and Tammy had stolen over $48,000 meant for the kids. The next week, I endured endless teasing about my new clean-cut look. "Did Jody blackmail you into joining normal society?" one person joked. "She didn't need to," Jody quipped back. "He promised to bathe at least 3 times a week now." Most people laughed, though some didn't quite get the humor. It was fascinating to see how people acted when they thought they were superior. But the humor faded when I learned Willa intended to sue me for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. Jody and I couldn't help but laugh, imagining how a judgment would work when no one could even locate me. Even the mailman found it ironic when he delivered the news. Fortunately, the district attorney and his team decided to represent me, piecing together the bigger picture. Peter estimated that Willa and Tammy had stolen more than $48,000 from my children, leading investigators to reopen the case of my lawyer's suspicious death as a potential homicide. The situation escalated quickly when Jody's ex-husband became a person of interest. If the DA's findings were accurate, both Willa and Tammy faced potential prison sentences of 7 to 10 years, and Willa's current partner, her former attorney and now common-law husband, risked disbarment. The lawyer they arranged to represent me would be paid out of their own funds, and I had to stay hidden to strengthen the case against them. We enjoyed a few weeks of peace, but that ended on a Sunday night when Josie called. She informed us that key paperwork would be filed the following day. Along with the call, she emailed me everything she'd gathered over 7 years, including notarized statements, recorded conversations, and a list of attorneys for a countersuit. One item that stood out was a $2 million accidental death insurance policy, which explained part of the missing money. Jody dug deeper and discovered it had been purchased just 6 months before I left. That night, we stayed up late forwarding all the information to the DA, growing increasingly certain that this entire lawsuit was a ploy to lure me back. By morning, Jody had already contacted the recommended attorneys, selecting one and sending them the evidence along with a retainer. The plan was to serve Willa and Tammy with our countersuit as soon as they officially filed their claims. By Friday morning, Jody called with news. Josie was on her way, traveling with guests. She'd left Thursday night, stayed overnight at a hotel, and would arrive that evening. This signaled that things were heating up. Jody and I decided to close the store on Saturday and spend a long weekend with family. Peter was coming with Connie and their son, though Connie only knew they were visiting Jody. Around 7 p.m., 2 vehicles, a Ford Explorer and a Ford Escape, pulled into the driveway. 4 adults stepped out and I instinctively tensed. Jody noticed and squeezed my hand. My truck was safely hidden in the garage, so no one knew I was there. "Who's with Josie?" Jody asked. "That's Peter, his wife Connie holding their baby, and Karen, my second oldest," I replied. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said with a steadying breath. Jody, holding our youngest, opened the door, and we stepped out to greet them. The moment Karen saw me, she burst into tears. I handed my son to his great-grandmother and wrapped Karen in a tight hug. Connie passed her baby to Peter and joined us, and seeing my daughters together after so many years was overwhelming. They had grown into beautiful young women, and it was a sight I'd never forget. "It's good to see you again, Peter," I said, shaking his hand. After introductions, Jody served a massive dinner. Beef shoulder, mashed potatoes with gravy, scones, Yorkshire pudding, string beans, and hot apple pie for dessert. Once the kids were settled, we dove into the pressing matters at hand. "First of all, Art, is it okay if I call you Dad?" Peter asked. I nodded. "Dad," Peter began, "the DA believes Jody's ex's car was involved in your lawyer's accident. They're running a paint comparison with the current owner's vehicle, and if it matches, he'll be charged with manslaughter. The fire that destroyed your lawyer's office the same night is being investigated as arson, and footage places him in the area." Willa and her attorneys sealed the divorce papers, thinking there's no record of what happened. "They filed their lawsuit against you earlier this week." Hearing this, Jody broke down in tears. "I always thought you were being overly cautious when you moved me here, but now I see you weren't. Even your questions to Grandma seemed excessive, but now I realize you needed to know exactly who we were dealing with before making a plan." Josie chimed in. "Willa and Tammy received the countersuit on Thursday. I think they've figured out I've been in contact with you, Art. We were worried they might retaliate, so we came here as quickly as possible." "Grandma, your house is ready," Jody said. "It's finished, and you just need to bring your clothes." "I brought most of them with me," Josie replied. "Connie will ship the rest, including the antiques. I've given her power of attorney to sell the house and its furniture. It's time to leave paradise for good. I'll drive back with Peter and Connie," I said, "and rent a truck to haul everything out. It's time to see if our suspicions are correct." "What suspicions?" Peter asked. "The lawsuit against me is just a trap to lure me out," I explained. "The $2 million accidental death policy makes it clear my lawyer's death was a test run." Peter, Connie, Karen, and Josie went pale as the truth set in. "They were planning to kill you, Dad," Connie said, her voice shaking. "I suspected as much when I left, but even my lawyer didn't believe me at the time," I said with a wry smile. "He realized I was right, but only after it was too late." Peter excused himself to make some urgent calls, giving me time to catch up with my daughters and Jody. Jody found some old photos of me from when we first met, and both girls admitted they wouldn't have recognized me today. When Peter returned, the room fell silent. "Willa will be taken into custody after the holiday," he announced. We can hold her for 48 hours before pressing charges for stealing annuity funds from her children. We're slowing down the process to prevent her from getting a bond hearing immediately. Dad, Peter continued, if you can fly in on Wednesday, rent a U-Haul, and visit some familiar places, you'll draw attention. Tell anyone who asks that you're packing up Josie's belongings. That'll force Willa to communicate from jail. The DA confirmed your suspicions, they were right. We'll have police protection for you at Josie's house until this is over. Jody's eyes narrowed. Peter, are you using my children's father as bait to draw out my cousins? What assurance do I have that he won't end up in danger? I looked at Jody, and she saw the resolve in my expression. Damn it, she said softly. You'd do it without hesitation, no matter what I think. Jody knew me better than anyone. Jody, Josie interjected. Art has always been that way. That's why I trusted him to save you from your ex. He never asks anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He's determined to put an end to Willa and Tammy's schemes for good. Jody smiled ruefully. If Art were a boxer, he'd be a world champion. He's quick on his feet and always 2 steps ahead. Willa and Tammy have no idea what they're up against. Relax, ladies, I said. I'll be in Peter's capable hands. Besides, if anything happens to me, he'll have to answer to Connie. Peter simply nodded, fully aware of the risks involved in my return to paradise. Peter and I continued our conversation as the situation unfolded. The DA thinks Jody's ex will make his move as soon as he hears you're in town, Peter explained. He'll be furious knowing you're the one who helped Jody escape that terrible marriage. And Willa? How will she find out I'm here? I asked. A planted informant in the city jail will leak the news early Thursday morning, Peter replied. If he gets caught in the act, do you think he'll confess to save himself? I pressed. With his military background, he tends to take responsibility when caught, Peter said thoughtfully. He's a follower, not a leader, and he's easily manipulated, especially by Willa and Tammy. I expect he'll cave quickly. As we approached the city limits, a sign reading Welcome to City of Refuge, population 34, 848, came into view. The name was ironic. The city council had long declared that federal laws didn't apply here, creating a modern-day Wild West where justice was subject to local whims. Law-abiding citizens were often targeted, while others evaded consequences entirely. It was a warped sense of progress, driven by those in power seeking cheap labor and lower wages. Nearly 7 years had passed since I left, and aside from a freshly paved main street, nothing seemed to have changed. My first stop was an old favorite, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar. To my relief, it was still there, its familiar exterior now freshly painted. Pulling into the lot, I parked the U-Haul and walked inside just before the weekday lunch rush. I wanted to be seen, this was all part of the plan. Taking a seat, I picked up a menu, though I already knew what I wanted. As expected, people were glancing at me, their phones in hand, likely sending messages. A server approached with coffee and creamer. Are you ready to order? She asked. Do you still have the Wednesday special meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes? I asked. She looked surprised. That's for regulars. We don't advertise it. How do you know about it? Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and fried onions with his meatloaf, I said with a grin. The waitress stared at me like I was crazy. Standing up, I added, never mind. I'll tell him myself. Pushing through the swinging kitchen doors, I caught sight of Jack, the son of the original owners and an old friend. He turned and smirked. You dumbass, he said, laughing. You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend. Good to see you, Jack, I replied. Jack shouted for the server to bring my coffee to the kitchen, and we sat down to catch up. We talked until just before the rush hit, at which point Jack asked one of his staff to call his wife so we could discuss more sensitive matters. Art, you should know my wife ended her friendship with Willa and Tammy after you left, Jack said, his tone serious. She couldn't stand what they did, or said, about you and the kids. Well, Jack, things are about to get messy, I said. Last night there was an arrest. If everything goes according to plan, will trigger a chain of events like falling dominoes. Connie's husband, Peter, is working with me. That's why I came back early. Jack nodded solemnly. Peter's a damn good cop and one of the most honest men I've met. He put 2 of our former city council members behind bars last year for corruption. But let's talk more later. Too many big ears around here. We were interrupted when Sasha, my younger sister, pulled into the lot. She looked great, but I could see the surprise in her expression when she finally noticed me. "Sasha," I said, standing to greet her. Her reaction was immediate. She lost her temper, then softened as I hugged her tightly. Felt like no time had passed. Jack asked the kitchen staff to give us a few minutes alone. "Do Mom and Dad know you're back?" Sasha asked. "No, and it's best if we keep it quiet for a few days," I replied. "Are you here because Willa was arrested last night?" "Yes, and things are going to get worse before they get better," I admitted. "Once I'm settled, I'll be under police protection. The DA's team is taking another look at my former lawyer's death and the arson attack on his office." Both Sasha and Jack's faces were grim as they digested the news. The district attorney, appointed 3 years ago, had been working to close numerous unsolved cases, and this one was no exception. "You're the bait, aren't you?" Jack said quietly. "If we're right, the arson, insurance scam, and other crimes will come to light in the next few days," I explained. "Willa's arrest and my sudden return are designed to disrupt a well-planned conspiracy." "What's driving all this?" Jack asked. "A $2 million accidental death policy on me," I replied. Sasha shook her head as we left the restaurant and headed toward my truck. As we chatted, we noticed Tammy pulling up in a car beside us. "Where are you staying?" Sasha whispered. "At Josie's house," I said. "I'll be moving her things to the new place. She left town to be near her granddaughter and her great-grandsons." Sasha's jaw dropped. "You and Jody? How?" "Josie and I stayed in touch after I left," I explained. "When Jody needed help escaping her marriage, her grandmother called me. We believe her ex was involved in my lawyer's death and the fire at his office." "Do Tammy and Willa know you're onto them?" Sasha asked. "Not yet, but they'll figure it out soon enough when they start making their moves," I said calmly. Tammy approached with a scowl. "Art, you need to drop part of your lawsuit against us," she demanded. "The DA is going to charge Willa within 48 hours, I replied. "Unfortunately, my attorney says that's impossible because Willa filed a new divorce petition claiming desertion, child abandonment, and back child support. Until the court rules on her claims, nothing can be altered." "You can't be serious. How are we supposed to bail her out with no assets?" Tammy asked angrily. "You have a court order freezing everything," I said. "Maybe your father can help by putting his house up as collateral. After all, you're both his daughters." Tammy turned and walked away, clearly frustrated. "Willa and Tammy's father wants nothing to do with them," Sasha said. "Not since he found out the truth about Seth's parentage. He says they turned out just as bad as their mother." That made me smile. With that matter settled, I got back in the U-Haul and headed toward Josie's house, stopping along the way to pick up packing materials. 3 hours later, I was backing the truck into her driveway, using the large mirrors to park close to the garage door. Once outside, I locked the truck and entered the house cautiously. Josie had mentioned leaving the curtains open, but I noticed they were now closed. That raised a red flag, so I texted Peter to ask if he had closed them. He replied that the officers securing the house might have done it. Feeling reassured, I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. "Mr. Ryan," an officer greeted me, holding out a phone. "Peter Edwards wants to speak with you." "Hi, Peter," I said. "Looks like the right people know I'm here." Tammy approached me earlier, asking me to lift the lien on her and Willa's assets. I refused. "I heard," Peter replied. "We recorded Willa and Tammy discussing their plans. Jody's ex, Brad, came up a lot. Willa told Tammy to let him know you were here, thinking that would motivate him to act. Our informant confirmed that Willa was told you were back in town to move Josie. When Brad asked for specifics, Willa mentioned Josie's granddaughter, Jody," Peter continued. Not even an hour later, Brad showed up, knowing where to find you. As Peter updated me, I saw the garage door opening. I stepped outside to pull bundles of cardboard boxes from the van and began packing up the house. Around 6:30 p.m., a pizza delivery from Papa John's arrived. The delivery guy asked if I was moving, and I casually replied, "No, just helping a friend." Brad made his move at 11 p.m. Using a tire iron, he picked the front door lock and slipped inside. Spotting a light on in the kitchen, he pulled a 9mm pistol from under his shirt and headed toward it. He found me sitting at the table, calmly sipping coffee. "Hey, Art," Brad said, smirking. "Willa and Tammy say hi. I'm here to find out where Jody is. Sorry, but I'd never tell you, or the man who burned my lawyer's office," I replied evenly. "But before you do what you came to do, tell me, how much were you promised from the insurance settlement?" "What makes you think I did it?" he asked, his smirk faltering. "Because you're exactly the kind of person they'd manipulate into doing their dirty work," I said. "So, how much of the $4 million policy did they offer you?" $4 million. Brad's face twisted in confusion. "They told me it was only $750,000. I laughed. "Did you know Seth isn't my son? He's actually Tammy's first husband's child. George and I were used and manipulated by both twins for years. My divorce attorney even sued George and Tammy for everything they had. That's why Willa's lawsuit claiming desertion and back child support is a scam. The divorce was finalized. She just never signed it. They've been playing you, Brad. Just like they played me." Brad's face turned pale. "You're saying they've been using me too?" "Ask yourself this," I said. "What are their plans for you? My divorce delayed their plan to get rid of me, but after my lawyer's death, their original scheme was back in motion. You're just another pawn to them. Do you really think they care about you?" Brad looked defeated. "I'm screwed either way," he muttered. "Not necessarily," I countered. "You could turn state's evidence, cut a deal, and get revenge on them for setting you up. That way, you'd get a lighter sentence and make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Brad hesitated, then set the gun on the table. "Call the police," he said quietly. "You don't have to," I replied. "They're already here. Turn around." Brad turned to see officers standing behind him, ready to take him into custody. Meanwhile, at Peter and Connie's house, Peter was on the phone, smiling as he hung up. Connie, who had been making hot chocolate, asked, "What's going on?" "Your dad surprised us all tonight," Peter said. "He talked Brad out of doing anything rash and basically got him to confess everything. The undercover cops recorded the entire exchange." Connie froze in shock. "How did my dad do that?" "He told Brad a few truths he didn't know, like Seth's real parentage," Peter explained. "He also convinced Brad that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out for murder. I'm not even sure if that's true, but it planted enough doubt for Brad to accept responsibility for a lesser charge instead of risking life without parole." "Aunt Josie always said my dad was a quick thinker," Connie said, shaking her head. "But this is incredible. What does this mean for my mom and Tammy?" "If Brad agrees to testify, they'll both face charges for arson, manslaughter, and attempted murder," Peter replied. The next morning, I woke up at 8 a.m. and immediately called Jack to arrange for the front door to be repaired. Within half an hour, a handyman arrived, replacing the door and installing new trim and locks. Just as he was finishing up, Connie pulled into the driveway with Jody. Jody jumped out of the car, tears streaming down her face, and ran to me. In that moment, I realized how much she had endured. "Brad was taken into custody last night," I told her. "He surrendered to the police, and I was never in any real danger." "Then why didn't you call me?" Jody asked, her voice tinged with frustration. "Why did I have to hear about it from Connie?" "It was almost 2 a.m. when everything settled," I admitted, pulling her close. "I figured I'd call you today." Jody wiped her tears as I promised. "I'll never put myself in that kind of danger again." Once the repairs were finished, we loaded Jody's luggage into the house and drove to Jack's restaurant for breakfast. There, we were greeted by Karen, Sasha, and my parents. Jack's staff had to rearrange tables to accommodate everyone, and the warmth of the reunion made the meal even better. My parents were overjoyed when they learned Jody and I had two sons, Carson and Hunter, named after both my grandfathers. They eagerly flipped through the photos of our family that Jody had saved on her phone. Meanwhile, my daughters opened up about reconnecting with me at Josie's house, sharing their excitement over the reunion. We were still sitting at the restaurant when Peter arrived. He looked exhausted, but his expression carried a sense of accomplishment. "Willa and Tammy are in custody now," Peter announced. "Brad has confessed to everything, including his initial plan to kill his father. He'll be charged with arson and manslaughter, and he's agreed to testify during what's already being referred to as the witch trials. Tammy and Willa are facing 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple charges of fraud." Peter continued, "The district attorney has also met with the divorce judge who handled your case, Art. They're working to expedite finalizing your divorce." "Peter, are you saying Art and I can finally get married?" Jody asked, her voice a mix of hope and disbelief. "The DA brought your original divorce papers to the judge," Peter explained. "They're hoping the judge will waive Willa's signature requirement and the waiting period, issuing the divorce certificate immediately." I turned to Jody, smiling. "I think I'd better buy you a proper engagement ring today and finally propose." The room fell quiet at my words. Jody's eyes welled up with tears as she tried to process what she'd just heard. She had always believed we'd get married eventually, but hearing it out loud caught her completely off guard. Before leaving the restaurant, my parents made us promise to come over for dinner that evening. Jody and I spent the afternoon packing until about 5:30. Then headed to my parents' house. Over dinner, Mom and Dad had plenty of questions, and Jody shared the story of how I had helped her escape her failed marriage, thanks to her grandmother's call for help. She spoke about finding her first job and how it had led her to this moment in life. We were still enjoying their company when Peter and Connie arrived with my divorce certificate. Felt like a weight had been lifted. I was finally free. Jody, glowing with happiness, bragged about our life together and our children. "You two should have a wedding before you head back," Mom said enthusiastically. Dad, sensing a good moment, grabbed Peter and me, handed us both fresh beers, and led us to the den. Once inside, he leaned in and said, "When word got out about Tammy's arrest, people started coming forward with more information. Half of the DA's office is now working on this case. What we knew before was just the tip of the iceberg. Tammy and Willa's schemes run deep. So deep, the mayor might be going down with them." "What about Willa's common-law husband?" I asked out of curiosity. "How involved was he?" "He'll likely be disbarred," Peter replied. "But as far as we know, he wasn't directly involved in the twins' crimes. He'll probably end up raising their kids." "Has anyone told Aunt Josie yet?" Connie asked when we returned to the group. Later, Peter and I made a quick trip to the mall. Peter bought Connie a set of earrings, while I picked out a 3-ring engagement set for Jody. By the time we returned, no one had realized we'd left. Back at the house, I was on the phone with Josie when Karen and her boyfriend arrived. The house filled quickly, and we all moved to the living room. The men brought chairs from the kitchen to make room for everyone. Dad insisted Jody sit in his chair, which caught Mom's attention. Her eagle eyes were on us as I walked over to Jody, knelt down, and asked her to legally become my wife. She was completely caught off guard but managed to say, "Of course," through her tears. The room erupted into cheers. Dad raised his glass proudly and declared, "I need to catch up on nearly 7 years of drinking with my son. And Jody, your engagement is the perfect way to start." Peter offered to drive Jody and me back to Josie's house, where the relief of the day began to sink in. The next morning, we went to City Hall to pick up our marriage license. Jody discovered she could fit into Connie's wedding dress, and plans began falling into place. Jack agreed to be my best man, and Karen became Jody's maid of honor. The DA offered to officiate the ceremony himself. There was one final task, buying a suit. Jody refused to let me marry her in blue jeans, so I made my way to Macy's to pick out something appropriate. On Sunday afternoon, in my parents' backyard, surrounded by family, we exchanged vows. Everyone watched with admiration as we officially became husband and wife. Even Willa and Tammy's father showed up to offer his support. We requested no gifts, but my former father-in-law handed me an envelope. "Art, this isn't a wedding gift. It's an early inheritance," he said with a smile. "The rest of my estate will go to your daughters." I tucked the envelope into my suit pocket, forgetting about it for the rest of the day. The ceremony was recorded by nearly everyone and immediately sent to Aunt Josie, who couldn't attend in person. When someone asked about our honeymoon, Jody's response warmed my heart. "After everything we've been through, we'll spend a week in Florida and a week in California at Disney with the kids. Without family, we wouldn't be where we are today." The next morning, before heading home, I handed Jody an envelope. Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000, along with a handwritten message. "Thank you for helping fix karma. I always suspected the twins were involved in their mother's death. I will enjoy watching them get the justice they deserve, and so will my granddaughters." Jody silently placed the note in her purse, saying nothing but understanding its significance. After hugging my daughters and parents goodbye, Jody and I climbed into the U-Haul and drove home, finally free of the shadows of the past.